Hello and welcome to ENVS 3100. My name is Tyler Knuckles. I'm down here. Hi, how you doing? I am your course instructor for this exciting exploration into human-wildlife interactions, conservation, and a whole host of other topics that I know you're going to enjoy, and I'm so excited to share with you. Let's dive into some course logistics, okay? I'll try to go through these pretty quickly. So this course is offered in two different lengths, typically a 10-week or a 13-week. If you're in the 10-week, don't worry, you're not missing out on a huge amount of content. I just repackage it differently, but I mention this because it can be different from the semester schedule that some students are used to. So keep this in mind and be sure you're tracking this and staying on schedule as you plan out your goals for this semester. This is an asynchronous course, which means we meet fully online. We don't meet on campus, and there's no Zoom call to join or Zoom room to where I will come and teach live for you. So I'll record videos like this one each week that you can watch, where I'm going to discuss the topics, dive into the material, and give you everything you need to know to really get the most out of the course, which means that these lecture videos are incredibly important. So I really, really ask that you watch these, engage with them. If you want to turn them off and just listen to them as a podcast, sometimes that's okay, but I do provide a lot of really cool visuals. And, some folks really enjoy looking at these slides and taking notes. So I do really want to stress it's so important that you watch these videos each week. I also provide bonus points sometimes just to check in to see which students are watching and which aren't. So it is pretty clear to me when you're not watching these videos, and we may need to have a meeting to discuss how we can get you back on track. The goal of this course is practical learning that builds. You might be saying, what does that mean? So my goal is that this is a really interesting topic, and we're going to go through theory, applied practice, ecological sciences, social sciences. And my goal is that everybody from different backgrounds, different stages in their academic journey, with different goals for their careers and futures, are going to get something they can use tangibly from the course. So a lot of the assignments are made applying practical and realistic things that you might do in the field of environmental studies, environmental sciences, conservation. So you can practice those skills, practice writing a brief, practice putting together a toolkit so that you can also have a practical portfolio to show to potential employers and take that away and use that in your future. So I'll talk about this a little bit more as we discuss the final project, but each assignment is designed to build on each other. Again, readings and lectures are key. We have readings each week. They're typically peer-reviewed literature, and I get it. Sometimes these things can be a little bit boring, but this is an exciting topic, and we're exploring really unique concepts and scenarios and real-life challenges that people face every day. So I really, really can't stress enough how important it is for me that you engage with these things. Make a commitment to yourself that you're going to be really engaged with the material this semester. You're paying money for this. You're taking out loans, maybe. Make it useful, right? Get the most out of this experience. So please make that commitment to yourself, make that commitment to me. Let's make the most out of this semester together. My course policies are in the syllabus. They're pretty standard. Assignments are typically due within a week, and I ask that you get those in and respect those policies. We're going to talk about communication in the next slide, but that really is going to be key. Of course, no cheating, no plagiarism. I don't want to see any of that. In regards to engaging with AI, right? It's a part of our lives in so many different ways now, and it's changed so quickly. Even just a simple Google search will give you AI results in many cases. I ask that you use that only as a tool to help guide your critical thinking, right? To help explain ideas or to help maybe, think about an outline or think about, ways that you could position a cool idea of your own in a different and creative way. Should not be used to write your papers. It should not be used to think for you or generate ideas for you, right? We can't lose this critical thinking component that's so key to our humanity, right? So it's okay if you use it a bit, right? But I can tell when you use it to do all your writing, and I have tools built into this course to detect that, right? I use AI a bit in this course. You'll see some fun cartoons. That's the primary use I use it for, is to create visuals, create fun cartoons, and create some images that may be hard for me to find, but I want to use to convey my point. So again, I'm not a anti-AI Luddite or anything like that, but let's be honest and let's give this course our best effort. How to succeed in this course? Let's dive into that in the next slide. So really the number one thing here is do not fall behind. Again, this course can be short compared to other courses that you may be used to at CU. So don't fall behind. Stay on track, plan accordingly. It is an asynchronous course, right? So you're not going to see me weekly, and I'm not going to be there to really be holding you accountable, right? And some students really do struggle with that. This is, taking on an added layer of personal responsibility. You really need to stay on track, plan accordingly, be sure that you're engaging with the lecture videos and the readings at the beginning of the week so that you have enough time to think about your ideas, write some drafts, and submit quality assignments that are due at the end of the week, right? These videos will be available throughout the entire semester, right? I don't lock the modules unless I need to make a few edits to the content, but I generally try to release those far in advance. So you'll have access to the material and you can get ahead if you want, but it's really, really important that you're not, just watching the lecture videos and just doing the readings and you're only leaving yourself a few hours to turn in your assignments. That's not going to be setting yourself up for success. In this course, we typically have an assignment almost every other week, and these can be reflection papers, discussion posts, quizzes, major assignments, or final projects, right? I'll talk through each of these and give you a little bit more context and color, but reflection papers are typically where I want you to reflect critically, engage deeply with the content we've been discussing from this week, but also previous weeks, right? So I'll, add prompts that ask you to provide your personal experiences or your original ideas to engage with the course topics in a critical manner, right? I really want to see you take your thinking outside the box. And that's going to be important in the way that I grade those. Discussion posts are equally kind of along the same vein. I'm going to ask you to critically engage with different topics, to think about different, maybe like polarizing ideas or contested topics, or to share your own experiences in a public forum where you can read your classmates' perspectives and they can also read yours, and we can try to create some dialogue in this fully online space. Again, it's really important that you're not just plugging in the prompts into ChatGPT and putting down whatever that spits out, right? That's not a discussion. That's just artificial intelligence talking to each other, right? Put in your original thoughts. These don't have to be the most magnificent submissions, right? We want to watch spelling, grammar, sentence structure, but discussions, it can be conversational, right? And I don't want to just see this, rudimentary or like, oh, this is a chore to reply to people, right? Give it some thought, give it some engagement, really read your peers' thoughts and try to create some actual dialogue, right? Not just tick the boxes of discussion posts. I want to see you post your own posts, your own discussion posts, but also reply at least twice to your peers. And these discussion posts are designed to be actual real-time conversations. And so I can't provide extensions for these assignments. Quizzes along the same vein. I can't provide extensions for quizzes. This is just fairness. This helps prevent cheating. And the quizzes are really a way in an asynchronous course that I can tell that you're staying accountable, you're engaging with the content, and you're getting the core concepts of the course. The quizzes are not incredibly difficult, so I don't want them to stress you out. But, they do require you to do the readings and watch the lectures to succeed. Again, if you feel that you're going to miss something or you have an appointment coming up and you need, an extension on a quiz, I need to know that way ahead of in advance, as far in advance as you can provide. That way I can set up a separate quiz for you or make a different arrangement. Okay, so do let me know about that. Major assignments are going to be creative, interesting assignments that are going to require a little bit more work than reflection papers. They're typically designed in kind of like a report or essay or creative report, technical report style. They're going to require more time, so you should plan ahead for these. And typically major assignments are going to incorporate directly into your final project. So the idea is that these major assignments, I'm going to give you feedback, which you're then going to improve and incorporate these sections into your final project, right? And again, with course communication, this is so important, right? I don't know what I don't know. If you're not communicating with me about the challenges you're facing or what you have going on, I can't help you, right? I won't know what's going on. Communicate as you feel comfortable. I try to create a really safe, open space for students to reach out to me, honestly communicate what they have going on. I wasn't a student too long ago, so I understand. In a lot of these cases, I'm happy to work with you to create a plan that you're going to succeed in this course. Again, I don't want to see anybody take advantage of this, right? If I'm getting a lot of emails from folks an hour before the assignments due, explaining, a situation or circumstance that's come up, That's tough, and we might have to meet and discuss how we can avoid this in the future. And if this continues, I may not be able to accept late work from you, and I might have to start penalizing late work in the future. So let me know. Again, I'm happy to work out a work plan. Things come up. This is an asynchronous course. We do have a little bit of flexibility, but again, let me know. And if it's a situation where you don't feel comfortable talking to me, or it's deeply personal, or might be really severe, please look into the syllabus. There's campus resources like counseling services and victim assistance that can help you if you don't feel comfortable talking to me, but also give you the resources that you might need, and they can communicate with me to help so we can support you as a team to get you to succeed in this course and take, the best effort possible. Again, I don't want this course to be something that stresses you out. That's like a really difficult course. I want this course to be fun. I want it to be engaging. I want you to, dip your toe into a topic that you might not be familiar with, get some applied skills. So, if you have other projects going on or other class assignments that are bogging you down, again, communicate with me. Come to office hours. I have office hours weekly, 2 times a week in the syllabus. I ask that you schedule those in advance, but in those office hours, we can talk and formulate a plan to make things work for you. So the final course project is a toolkit. And the idea is that this toolkit will be an amalgamation, a mixture of everything you've learned throughout the semester, and you'll put it together as this professional tool that folks could use in a practical way to address a human-wildlife conflict or conservation conflict issue. We'll talk about this more as we go through, but the idea is that, again, you're going to incorporate your earlier work. So I really want to see you, give your best to those assignments, but then in your final project, take that feedback that I've given you to make it the best it can be. It should be all in one document with clear headings, visuals, and organized sections. Some people do this as a PowerPoint. I've had a video submission. I've also had just like a very standard report, and I provide an example that's a very standard report in the assignment details. I'm open to, what you want to submit, but if you do want to do something a little bit more creative, let's talk first and be sure it's going to meet the goals and tick the boxes of the assignment. Everything that you submit to me should be reviewed, proofread, have correct grammar, correct spelling. Today's day and age, when we do everything online, we do everything with laptops, and everything has, spell check and word processing power. I just shouldn't see any sort of really glaring grammar and spelling errors, sentence structure errors, incomplete thoughts or words. That really just shows me that you didn't give the effort to this assignment, and that's really not acceptable at the college level. So please proofread all your assignments and be sure you're turning in the best quality of work. And that really goes with this final project. I want to see your best work at the end of the semester. And as I mentioned, APA citations are really, really important to me. Citing all sources, let's avoid plagiarism. If you are not super sure how to write scientifically or use citations correctly, or you're not familiar with APA formatting and how to do in-text citations, all that stuff, you can come to me in office hours. You can speak with other professors or your advisors. You can also go to the library, where you're giving your student funds to pay incredible staff who could support you to review your writing. They often have workshops on how to improve your writing. So I want to see that, right? If it's, if you're drawing on data, you're providing an example, it's not, your original thought. And even if it is your original argument, it's just always a good idea to cite as many sources as possible to back up your arguments. In today's day and age, especially, it's important to question all information and really present strong cases that demonstrate, where you're drawing your ideas from and support your points. So I'm going to be really strict about that. I'm going to really, focus on that a lot in your assignment grading. So please, let's go out the gates, citing sources, citing information. This is something you should be really familiar with at this point in your academic career. So who am I? I'm Tyler Knuckles, like your hand. I'm a PhD candidate in the ENVS department and the Wells group. My advisor, Karen Bailey, helps me teach this course sometimes, so you might see her listed as a co-instructor, and she might even be in some of these videos. She might be grading your papers, so she might be involved. But if it's just me, it's just me. I have 10 years of experience in conservation. I do study human-elephant conflict in Thailand, so I do consider myself an expert on this topic, and this course I have a lot of field experience working in Thailand and Southeast Asia, as well as in Colorado on these topics. And I'm a social ecological scientist. So in environmental studies, I have experience with the social and ecological dimensions of conservation sciences. So if you are curious about the field or me or my journey, or you want career advice or anything, I love mentoring students. Please send me an email. We can schedule time to meet or, join my office hours. That's a great space for us to connect and catch up. So let's get into the content, right? What is human-wildlife conflict? What is this interesting idea, these string of words that you may have never heard before? So technically defined by the IUCN and other researchers, human-wildlife conflict refers to the interactions between wild animals and people that may provide negative outcomes for both parties. This can be economic losses for humans, injury or death for either humans or wildlife, and negative impacts for conservation efforts and environmental efforts as a whole. Conflict typically arises when the needs or the space or the resources of wildlife and humans is in competition or overlaps, right? Some really, really important concepts of human-wildlife interactions that make this a really profound issue is the global biodiversity crisis. We lose something like 100 species every second. And we're facing a very serious extinction crisis that needs to be addressed. And human-wildlife interactions and human-wildlife conflict really exacerbates this challenge. It puts, protected species and species on the rebound in dangerous situations where, poaching can be exacerbated, retaliatory killing, loss of habitat, but also danger to humans, right? Which then erodes participation and support of biodiversity conservation efforts. So human-wildlife interactions is deeply embedded within that issue. Now, as growing human populations, agricultural needs, and development continues to expand across the globe, we see more human-wildlife habitat behavior and movement overlap, which just brings people and wildlife closer together more often, which can result in dangerous and deadly encounters. It's important to not allow ourselves to fall into one-dimensional, myopic silos, thinking, well, human-wildlife conflict is the fault of too many people on this earth, right? Or, people who live near forested areas just need to give more space back to the wildlife. Or, we're doing too much farming. We need to just scale that back. And then we would find a solution, right? These are all important things to consider and all important arguments to finding better solutions and tackling the heart of this challenge. But as I'll show you throughout this course and as we engage in these topics, this sort of singular dimensional thinking can get us in trouble because this is a deeply complex and context-specific issue that we really need to examine in a very multidimensional, multidisciplinary way, okay? Global pushes for increases and expansion of protected areas also creates more human-wildlife conflict in some cases. The push for 30 by 30 to protect 30% of the Earth's the Earth's forested spaces by the year 2030. Again, a lot of folks, indigenous communities are living in those regions. And as we expand protected areas, create more habitat for wildlife, sometimes again, we're pushing people and wildlife closer together. Same goes with, recovering species. In the case of the Asian elephant in Thailand, Asian elephants are endangered, but they've seen a massive recovery in Thailand where I work. But this means more elephants and more elephants coming out of the forest to eat readily available, easily accessible agricultural crops, which then creates more of a problem, right? So sometimes conservation goals and conservation benefits can actually create unintended consequences that we didn't foresee that make our efforts harder. So we have to be thinking about this. Zoonotic disease is a really big one, specifically, thinking about the COVID-19 pandemic. Animals, these major pandemics, these zoonotic diseases, very often spread from animals to humans. They jump that human-wildlife, disease boundary. And so as people clear more forest and come into contact with wildlife more and are bit and things like this, we see more zoonotic diseases arising. And so that may seem disconnected, but it's a key component of human-wildlife conflict resolution. Indigenous rights and livelihoods, as we mentioned, with the loss of homelands, traditional grazing lands, things like that, being denied entry to spaces where indigenous communities previously lived and called home and have cultural connections and survival, livelihood connections too, in the name of conservation can create another form of conflict. And then also human safety and resources, right? Living alongside dangerous wildlife like tigers is difficult, and trying to raise livestock is difficult when you have wolves taking them down and hurting your livelihood. So human safety and resources, especially in spaces like Colorado, is a really important topic and something we think about a lot in this space. And a key question that I'm going to bring up a lot in this course, and especially this week, is can humans and wildlife truly be in conflict? I want you to think about that. Can humans and wildlife be in conflict? When we think of conflict, we might think of arguments or fighting, or having beef with somebody. But can wildlife really feel a conflict? Can they feel angry at humans? This is a key debate in the field. And we're going to talk about this as we go through the semester, but it really shows why language can be incredibly important in this space. So this is, a very high level overview, but human wildlife conflict can be thought of as a continuum in some situations, right? So there can be frequency and severity is often deployed to measure, right? And so there can be high frequency and high severity. So a conflict that is occurring very regularly and is very devastating to the human and wildlife populations. There can be high frequency but low severity, such as like a rabbit eating your garden, or destroying an herb garden or something like that, right? It's pretty low severity, but it could happen all the time. Low frequency, low severity. This could be, a rare or migratory species that may sometimes cause issues, but it's not that big of a deal. But if we don't monitor it carefully, it could become a big deal, right? I use bats not in the terms of like spreading zoonotic disease, but in terms of like establishing colonies within different houses. Depending on the region, this could be high frequency, but it can be kind of low severity in terms of it may just be associated with fear or uncomfortable settings for the human population. Low frequency, high severity. These can be rare events like a shark attack that can be quite rare in frequency, but can be extremely severe and relate to loss of life. And what can change this continuum figure? Many things, right? The context that you're working in, the species, the animal species, the wildlife species, the local human cultures, the location, the climate, psychology, ecology, so many more things. And we're going to talk about that as we go throughout the semester. But again, I present this because we have to think of things in many cases large and small. It requires an idea called systems thinking, and it requires us to juggle a few different ideas as we go in this field, and it's very important to find holistic solutions. So some examples of human-wildlife conflict, and I'm not going to read these in depth, but the slides are posted on Canvas, so if you want to go more into the text I provide, you're more than welcome. But crop raiding is a big one, right? So large, charismatic, dangerous, intelligent mega herbivores like elephants coming out of protected areas to eat crops that are easy to forage, highly energetic, and very easily accessible. Very damaging to livelihoods, very easy for wildlife to become habituated or fall into patterns or behaviors that will make them, take on more risk to do these behaviors more often. So very, very serious challenge across the entire globe, and a very complex challenge to solve. Livestock predation, this is the big one in Colorado, along many of the Western states that have incorporated or reintroduced wolf populations. So wolves taking down livestock like goats, sheep, pigs, especially cattle. This can be devastating and can, create very, very severe emotional and economic distress for ranchers who are already struggling in a very, very challenging economy and a very challenging livelihood to survive and keep their households' well-being going. So these two are quite similar: crop raiding, livestock predation, related to livelihoods, related to agriculture, related to this overlap in these what we call agro ecosystems where wildlife live, where human-dominated land, agriculture and very human-modified landscapes exist. And these areas often touch each other, they abut each other. And so this challenge becomes very difficult and can become very out of control very quickly. And things like livestock predation, as we'll show, can strangely become political and can become very polarizing when you have this sort of difference between the experiences and the values and the beliefs of rural communities and the conservation values, experiences, and ideas of urban populations who might want to see more wolves come back to our forests. And then ranchers who, say, well, this is my problem and you get to have a say in it, but you don't have to deal with it, right? And it's very complex, and we'll go more in depth this semester. Property damage, raccoons are a really good example. Like I mentioned, bats, possum, but it can be very severe, right? When an elephant, bursts through the wall of your house, or fisher people who, have birds that damage their nets or their boats, things like this. Property damage is quite severe and very difficult because if the raccoon destroys your house, who pays to fix it, right? Not the raccoon. So this can be quite difficult and quite common as well with human-wildlife conflict. Threats to human safety is going to be, one of the most visible, one of the most discussed, one that catches the headlines and, catches the ideas of many people. But, living around dangerous, highly migratory or, needing large areas of space, animals who have high energetic needs and need to, take down big game or consume a large amount of plants and matter to sustain their energetic requirements. This, creates a challenge. Folks who live near tigers, elephants, wolves, threats to human safety is really severe and can create a whole host of social, ecological, psychological components that make solving these issues really difficult. Spread of disease, like we mentioned, diseases jumping this barrier between humans and wildlife. Again, humans and wildlife coming into conflict, coming into more interactions, sharing more spaces, this becomes more prevalent and more severe. Resource competition. In areas that are very drought stricken, you can have competition between wildlife and people for water resources, but you can also have primates, birds stealing food, stealing, fish catch, stealing resources, creating this clash between humans and wildlife for resources, finite resources in a finite environment. Fisheries and aquatic conflicts, this is a really big one with seabirds, all kinds of different hosts of conflict on the ocean that are often quite understudied. Ship strikes to whales, ships hitting whales. This is often not considered as much or discussed, but a very serious human-wildlife conflict. And as we continue to see the depletion of our oceans, major conservation challenges in the ocean to, keep fishing stocks at healthy levels, to protect endangered seabirds, to prevent the spread of pollution, plastic and waste in the oceans, but also as we see climate change alter the composition, the functioning of our ocean systems, these conflicts between humans and wildlife, these issues become more and more prevalent and more serious. When you're operating in an already threatened livelihood, such as fishing, and now you have wildlife interfering with that, maybe more so or at a continued rate, but now you're in a more perilous or vulnerable situation. This creates really serious circumstances where a lot of problems can arise. Habitat fragmentation and overlap, again, another big one that we see almost anywhere. But a really key example of this is, hitting a deer or hitting an elk or a moose, God forbid, in your car. Road strike is a very serious and very, heavily studied and heavily considered human-wildlife conflict. And again, road strike is a really good example of the inability of wildlife to be in conflict with a human, right? The animals are typically not jumping out in front of cars on purpose, right? So these are issues where we have to consider how we plan our human spaces to accommodate wildlife, because we can't expect them to just stay in a designated zone, right? Wildlife don't see barriers that way. And so this fragmentation overlap creates conflict in many cases. So as I mentioned, there's a very serious terminology debate, and this revolves around what term we should use. So throughout the course and throughout the semester, you might hear me say human-wildlife conflict, human-wildlife interactions, human-wildlife coexistence, human-wildlife tolerance, and human-wildlife transformation, right? So obviously we're talking about interactions, relationships between humans and wildlife, but conflict interactions is quite a debate, right? If we aren't using the right terminology, are we sort of polarizing our audience off the gate? Are we misrepresenting what we're actually talking about? Are we villainizing wildlife? Are we putting sort of anthropomorphic ideas onto wildlife? All questions that are asked a lot in this field. It can create confusion when things are ambiguous. Different stakeholders may have varying interpretations of what's happening, right? Like if we're aiming for human-wildlife coexistence, right, where humans and wildlife share space, resources, live in the same space, but local communities feel like they've been coexisting with wildlife for centuries, we might not be on the same page, right, in the work we're trying to do. So this is really important to consider. Tolerance is the idea that there's a capacity where people can experience a certain level of human-wildlife conflict and continue on with what they're doing, where they won't retaliate, or they won't perhaps change their ideas. We'll examine this way more in depth throughout the semester, but that's where tolerance comes from. And transformation is this idea of a big change, a systemic change that can potentially result in a different outcome in those interactions, right? So very important to consider, but please don't let that confuse you. And let's try not to get too bogged down in this either. I would love, there will be assignments where I'll ask you to explain and examine these ideas, but, let's not be critical of each other for using conflict and different things, right? We can all get along and learn together and share terminology. Standpoint also matters, and there is a thing called wildlife value orientations, right? And it's how you think about wildlife, how you prioritize wildlife and the environment. This can often determine how you interact with wildlife or support conservation. So there's, different ideas, different concepts that we will dive more into, especially in the psychology units. But typically in this, not typically, but within this research scope, you can think of new conservation that thinks a lot about capitalism connected with nature cultural unity, convivial conservation that looks at post-capitalism, post-growth, but aligns similarly with that nature culture overlap. There is neo-protectionism, which sees nature and culture as separate, but wants to move away from financial or capitalist ideas of protecting nature. And then there's mainstream conservation that looks at deploying financial tools but does still see nature and culture as different, right? So examples of this, new conservation, that could be like ecosystem services, right? And if you're not familiar with ecosystem services, this is the idea that you work together with community members to see the monetary or livelihood value in nature, and you incentivize people to display pro-conservation or pro-environmental behaviors through capitalist incentives, right? Convivial conservation is a newer idea, but rooted in very long-standing ideas of nature and humans are the same, connected. We are part of nature, and we have to look at post-capitalist, post-growth ideas to protect nature. So this may be creating just spaces where humans and wildlife can coexist or overlap or interact and create really purposeful spaces for that, moving away from thinking about only tourism as solutions for conservation, working on community empowerment and justice and equity approaches to protecting wildlife. Neo-protectionism is going to be more focused on separating nature and people in a way, and doing that in a way that's not super financially heavy. So neo-protectionism can think about like hunting, things like that, and different wildlife uses. Mainstream conservation has some overlap with neo-protectionism, but you can think of like fortress conservation, building heavily protected areas to keep wildlife and separate and humans separate. Neo-protectionism really has a very, very serious, like, we're gonna just put wildlife over here, lock the doors kind of ideas. So again, big questions for the course that I want you to think about. I want you to engage with critically. And I want this to sort of, stay in your mind as you're completing assignments, doing readings. But are all human wildlife interactions negative, right? Are they all bad? Is what we are discussing actually human-human conflict, humans in conflict with each other, rather than humans and wildlife in conflict? I'll give you a hint. Many human-wildlife conflicts are actually human-human conflict. And what does it actually mean to coexist, to share space with wildlife? What does that actually mean? What does that mean to you? What would that mean in different contexts? Is it sustainable? Is it possible? It's a very big question. So next steps to do this week. So you're going to have your first readings and this video, which I hope you're watching. You're going to have your first reflection paper that's going to be due at the end of the week and a bonus point. So if you've watched this far, I hope you have. There's going to be your first bonus point assignment. So I would like for you to email the course instructor about your final project, right? And I want you to answer 3 questions. What are the top 3 species that you would be interested in working on? So this would be the species, the wildlife, the animal, Asian elephant, wolf, uh, frigate bird, raccoon, elk, right? What 3 species would you be most interested in working on throughout the semester? And remember, the idea is that your assignments are meant to build. So if you decide to work on the American alligator, I would like for you to stick to that species throughout the semester. So let us know your top 3 species, and we will work to assign that for you. What type of conflict is most associated with each of these species that you chose? Tell me from your research and your understanding. And where in the world do you want to focus? So you need to specifically select a specific context. The more specific, the easier it's going to be for you. But if you want to go like countrywide or regionally, we can discuss that too. But again, I would prefer you to sort of focus as zoomed in as possible because it's really going to help you with your toolkit and to answer some context specific questions. Okay. So that is it for this week. Again, thank you for watching. Welcome to the course. Remember that there are office hours, email, look over the syllabus this week, and again, reach out with any questions. Also, just reach out if you want to introduce yourself, right? It would be great to have some names to faces and at least online names to faces for this course. So thanks so much, and we will talk soon. Take care.